Good evening and welcome to The Beauty of Crisis. And my name is Jens Klenner. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of German at Bowdoin, and I am really excited to see so many people here this evening. An evening that would have not been possible without the help and support of many here on campus. I am grateful to the help of my colleague, Professor Birgit Tautz, and the Department of German, also to Aaron Kitsch and the Department of English, and Ta Herrera from Economics. I'm also very grateful to the generous support that we received from the Andrew Mellon Foundation to make this evening possible tonight. So thank you. Our guest tonight is Jonas Lüscher, the author of the novella Frühling der Barbaren, Barbarian Spring, the English title, which was published in 2013 by the renowned Beck Verlag in Munich. Currently, it is in its 7th edition, I believe, and soon available in no less than 14 languages. Frühling der Barbaren quickly became the literary sensation of the year. Nominated for several awards, the German and Swiss National Book Award among them, the novella received glowing after glowing review in every major German language newspaper in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. To this day, the story has seen 3 stage adaptations, and Jonas is currently negotiating film rights with several production companies. Yet Jonas, born in 1976 in Switzerland, has not always been a professional author of novellas. He was trained as an elementary school teacher in Bern, earned a master's degree in philosophy from the Munich School of Philosophy, worked many years as a script consultant in the film industry, as a research associate at the Institute for Technology, Theology and Natural Sciences at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität of Munich, as an ethics teacher in the Munich public school system, and most recently as a lecturer in philosophy at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. In addition, Jonas is also the author of the libretto for Matthias Nitschke's opera Jetzt, which premiered in November of 2012 at the l'Opéra Nationale de Montpellier. I first met Jonas in 2012 at Stanford University, where he was a visiting scholar at the Department of Comparative Literature, conducting dissertation research on the significance of narrative structures to explain complex social phenomena against the backdrop of Richard Rorty's neo-pragmatism. Jonas has done a lot. But allow me to briefly turn to Jonas's novella to provide a bit of background for what Jonas will read to us tonight. The novella opens with a conversation of 2 patients perambulating in a mental hospital. The time of the conversation is here and now, and it's placed somewhere in the German-speaking industrialized north. One of the 2 patients becomes our anonymous narrator, hospitalized for an ordinary depression. The other is our protagonist, a Swiss industrialist with the telling name pricing. His diagnosis is more complicated. Even after 3 weeks in the hospital, the doctors are at a loss as to what actually happened to him, in which traumatic events caused his state of mind. I'm uncertain if Pricing even deserves the title of protagonist of this novella, for he may be one of the most passive and indecisive characters in literature to this day. But it is his story that we follow back in time to Tunisia and to the numerous events that unfold in an oasis resort with the eponymous name 1001 Nights. It is events, perhaps tiny stories, that propel Pricing forward in time. He is heir to a company producing obsolete TV antennas in a time of cable television. The small company of now 35 employees, at that time 35 employees, is at the brink of bankruptcy when a Bosnian technician, Bogdanovic, working for Pricing's firm, invents a so-called Wolfram CBC switch and saves the company, which now suddenly employs 1,500 people across the globe. Pricing is the CEO, but de facto Bogdanovic, who advanced to general manager, runs the firm and makes all decisions for his boss. It is also Bogdanovic who sends Pricing to Tunisia in order to meet with his suppliers in Sfax. A competitive supplier offers to produce at cheaper costs thanks to child labor and tries to sweeten the deal by offering Pricing his daughters in marriage. It is the explosion of the supplier's phosphate plant and his subsequent death that causes Pricing to move on to the next step of his journey, the oasis resort owned by the daughter of his current supplier, Slim Malouch. Saida, the daughter, runs the resort. On their way to the resort, they encounter a bus which ran into a herd of camels, all of which are one but dead. Pricing could easily replace the herd with what he makes in one day, but his lethargy prevents him from acting, and he does not interfere so as not to anger Saida, because the bus belongs to a cousin of her father's, Malouch, and is transporting departing guests from the resort, and the camels were actually for other guests at the resort who want to go in a desert expedition. The novella is rife with stories and encounters which seem out of place and out of time. A Swiss industrialist in Tunisia, TV antennas in a time of cable television, camels encountering buses. But this may come to no surprise in a globalized world. But it might be exactly these encounters which will cause us to actually ask questions about what it is that is going on. Frühling der Barbaren is framed not only by the conversation of the two patients in a mental hospital, but also by Preising's answer to a question which we don't know. And this answer comes at the beginning and at the end of the novella. Du stellst die falschen Fragen. You're asking the wrong questions. Barbarian Spring beautifully eludes the question, yet provides material rich enough to ask many. Books, and here I'm also quoting Jonas's novella, books make for excellent conversation starters. With that in mind, I would like to welcome you to an evening with Jonas Lüscher, an evening full of stories and hopefully rich in conversation. Please join me in welcoming Jonas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jens, for this beautiful introduction. What you told about the book, it's just the first chapters. He just talked about the first chapter, not the whole book. And thank you very much for the German department for inviting me here, and thank you, Bowdoin. It's beautiful to be here. I'm going to read in English, which is a premiere for me. It's the first time ever I have to read for public audience in English, so please do excuse my Swiss-German accent. But I will read from the second chapter, but I will start with just one page from the German book, because I do know that many here do speak German, and also for those who don't, you can have an idea how it would sound in German, what the German tone is. Das 1001 Night Resort in der Oase Chup war einer temporären Berbersiedlung nachempfunden oder vielmehr dem, was sich der von der Marktforschung errechnete typische Tunesien-Tourist der Premiumklasse unter einer typischen Berbersiedlung vorstellte, wenn er denn überhaupt eine Vorstellung hatte, und sich nicht sowieso unvoreingenommen wie ein weißes Blatt Papier, dankbar wie ein leeres Gefäß von den Ideen einer weltberühmten Resortdesignerin aus Magdeburg überzeugen ließ. Stabile weiße Zelte waren großzügig im lichten Palmenhain verteilt. Einige gemauerte Gebäude, die Restaurants und Bars beherbergten, gruppierten sich Einige gemauerte Gebäude, die Restaurants und Bars beherbergten, gruppierten sich, ein pittoreskes Ensemble bildend, um einen großen Natursteinpool. Eine gekalkte Mauer, deren Scheitel mit Splittern aus grünem Flaschenglas versehen war, umschloss die Anlage auf 3 Seiten. Das Pièce de Résistance aber war zweifellos die Spa-Anlage, die am nördlichen Rand der Oase, wo sich eine steile Sandsteinwand erhob, in Grotten untergebracht war, die einstmal zur Kühlung der Kamelmilch oder Ähnlichem gedient haben mochten. Zu einer Zeit mit bloßen Händen gegraben, als an diesem Ort noch Menschen gelebt hatten, die nicht im Urlaub waren oder ihr Geld nicht mit jenen Urlauber verdienten. Es kam aber der Tag, an dem sie sich vor die Wahl gestellt sahen, entweder das Bauern- und Hirtendasein zugunsten einer Anstellung ins Limmerluchs Resort aufzugeben oder sich sonst wohin zu verziehen, was in der Regel bedeutete, sich mit der ganzen Familie in einer kleinen Wohnung in den wuchernden Peripherien von Tunis, Sfax oder Gabesch zusammenzupferchen und darauf zu hoffen, dass zumindest einer der Familie eine Arbeit fand, die zum Beispiel darin bestand, für europäische Firmen mit so dynamischen und exotisch klingenden Namen wie Prixing elektronische Bauteile zusammenzulöten. Man konnte aber auch sein ganzes Geld zusammenkratzen und alles auf ein Pferd setzen, welches meistens der wagemutigste und frustrierteste der jungen Männer einer Familie zu reiten hatte. Das Pferd war ein Boot, in der Regel nur unzureichend seetüchtig und immer überfüllt. Aber wer die Überfahrt überlebte, der fand vielleicht ein Auskommen in Europa, von dem am Ende des Monats etwas übrig blieb, das man in die Heimat schicken konnte. And now I'm going to start at the same page in the English translation. The 1001 Night resort in the oasis at Chup was modeled on a nomadic Berber settlement, or to be more precise, on what market researchers thought a first-class tourist to Tunisia might imagine when he pictured a typical Berber settlement, assuming, that is, he could picture such a thing at all and wasn't impartial as a blank sheet of paper and receptive as an empty vessel, simply being spoon-fed ideas by a world-renowned resort designer from Magdeburg. Sturdy white tents were liberally distributed around the bright palm grove. Various stone buildings, housing restaurants and bars, were concentrated around a natural rock pool, forming a picturesque ensemble. The whole compound was enclosed on three sides by a whitewashed wall topped with shards of broken bottle glass. Yet, without a doubt, the piece de résistance was the spa complex built into the sandstone bluff enclosing the northern perimeter of the oasis, in caves that had most likely once been used to keep camel's milk or other such provisions cool. They'd been dug out by hand at a time when this place had been inhabited by people who weren't either on holiday or earning a living from holiday makers. But the day finally came when those people found themselves faced with the stark choice of either giving up their life of farming and herding in favor of a job at Slim Malouch's resort, or upping up sticks and going somewhere else, which usually meant moving into a cramped apartment in Tunis, Sfax, or Gabesh, with all their nearest and dearest and hoping that at least one family member found work. For instance, soldering electronic components for European firms with dynamic and exotic-sounding names like Brixing. The only other option was to scrap together every last cent and put it on one horse, usually ridden by the feistiest and most frustrated of the family's son. In this case, the horse was actually a boat, barely seaworthy and invariably overloaded with other migrants. But anyone who survived the crossing might manage to scratch a living in Europe and put enough by at the end of every month to send back home. And if he was to remain in his adopted country and find a wife who reminded him of home and have children with her, then maybe a guy like Prodanovic would turn up one day at the kids' school as guest speaker and give them a rousing pep talk. Assimilate and succeed, who dares wins, you can be a winner too, yes, even you. In any event, Pricing was really impressed by the spa. I just sat down with a book on the terrace of the base, at least that's what Pipa, my new acquaintance whom I'll tell you about presently, and I soon christened the place. It was a little terrace up on the hill above the spa, which you could get to by climbing a flight of steeps hewn into the bar rock, and on it there was a kind of oriental four-poster, a wooden frame with carved posts and white drapes, which was equipped with an incredibly comfortable mattress and masses of cushions of every shape and size, all in pure white. Perched up there, just above the tops of the palm trees, you could enjoy a panoramic view of the desert and even catch a cooling breeze now and then. Anyway, I just ensconced myself there when I heard the sound of bare feet ascending the stone steps. I sat up immediately, having thought I was going to have the place to myself. I'd made myself at home and sprawled indecorously all over the mattress and cushions. Peering over the top of my book, the first thing I saw was a well-groomed short hairstyle flecked with silver. Its owner was a woman around my age who'd evidently found it a bit of a struggle getting up the steep steps, given that she was balancing a heavy water jug and a glass in one hand, and holding a pair of nearly new-looking leather sandals with tulips in the other, all the while trying not to drop the book she had wedged under her arm. It was doubtless these trying circumstances that caused her mask of composure to slip for an instant when she caught sight of me, and she shot me a look of undisguised frustration. Like me, she'd obviously sought this place out for its solitude. In any event, she quickly pulled herself together, greeted me with scrupulous courtesy, put her jug and glass down on the little side table, and with a tentative "may I," sat herself down on the opposite side of the mattress without waiting for my reply. She crossed her legs, opened her book, and paying me no further heed, buried her nose in it. We both affected looks of studied concentration, since it was clear that neither of us were the kind of people who were used to sharing a madrass with a stranger. However, when I put my book aside for a moment to wipe my sunglasses, I saw her steal a sideways glance at what I was reading. "We seem to have the same interest," she said, holding up her own book to show me the dust jacket. We were both reading Mahmoud Messadi's The Birth of Oblivion, she in an English translation and I in the German. My bookseller recommended it to me when I told her about my trip to Tunisia. Books are a wonderful icebreaker. We began chatting away quite happily, swapping notes on our shared reading matter. She was enthralled by Messadi. I hadn't made up my mind yet, but she was already quite a bit further on than me. Then, suddenly, she took off her dark glasses, revealing eyes of a quite strikingly intense blue. Truth be told, that was the only really notable thing about her appearance. She was of medium build, with an unremarkable figure. She'd lost any girlish sweltness around the hips and tautness in her upper arms, and had one of those expensive-looking hairdos that educated Northern European women get when they feel they've grown too old for long hair. She was wearing barely any makeup, and her clothes spoke of good taste and a total lack of vanity. Cotton, linen, presumably from an environmental-friendly manufacturer. "Philippa Grayling," she said, holding out her hand, "but call me Pippa, please." It was the English teacher Pippa Grayling, then, who initiated Pricing into the social standing of the various guests at the desert resort. When he recounted it to me, he tossed in an apposite quotation from Anna Karenina, which summarized the social hierarchy in that little German spa where the Szczerbaskis go for a rescuer. What really made Pippa and Pricing click straight away was the fact that they were both at the 1001 Nights under duress. She was here because her son had decided to hold his wedding at the Tunisian Oasis resort, flying in no fewer than 70 friends and family members. That, Pippa explained, making no attempt to hide her irritation, was what a young couple who both worked in the city imagined passed for a society wedding. Her son Mark and his bride-to-be Kelly formed the nucleus of that large group whom Pricing had already seen gathered around the pool. Young people in their late 20s or early 30s, brash and self-confident, trim and gym-toned. The men sports sand-colored chinos, polo shirts and moccasins, and the women tank tops and figure-hugging shorts over golden tan, silky smooth legs, flip-flops on their dainty pedicured feet. Those who'd opted for a dip in the pool were wearing the kind of swimming trunks familiar from old photos of JFK on the beach at Martha's Vineyard, or skimpy bikinis that showed off flat stomachs to the best effect and justified the Brazilian they had just done before coming away. Even in this state of near nakedness, though, they all looked like they were in uniform. Pricing kept running into little knots of them all over the complex. He'd encounter them standing around one of the bars, cracking jokes or disappearing, snogging furiously and grabbing each other under the waistbands of their tight shorts into their climate-controlled tents, or ordering the staff around imperiously and stomping their way through the palm grove, cursing as they searched for better reception for their blackberries. After all, their salaries were such as to require that they should be contactable wherever they were, 24/7. Pricing was astonished that the city could spare 50 of its young guns in the present climate. Maybe, he thought, the game was up already and they'd taken refuge here. Pricing was tickled by this idea and shared it with Pippa to try and cheer her up, but all it elicited was a contemptuous snort which for one alarming moment he thought might be directed at him, until he realized with relief that she was gazing at the rabble who'd assembled at the southern end of the pool. The social gradient, as she put it, started at the northern end. That was where Kelly's brothers and sisters, who'd also been invited, had withdrawn to with their children. The kids, in loud patterned trunks, kept hurling themselves into the pool and clambering out again over and over, hollering and shrieking all the while. Perched on the edge, their mothers were annoyed by the incessant splashing which had wrinkled the pages of the women's magazines they were reading. After a few failed attempts to fraternize with the city boys, Kelly's brother Willie, his chest turning red from the Tunisian sun, had taken refuge in a large yellow swimming ring, where, with the aid of a couple of bottles of Heineken, he now lay basking and trying to fathom how he should be feeling vis-à-vis the luxury surrounding him, for which he had his sister and new brother-in-law entirely to thank, and which he'd never be able to afford for his family of his own bat. He'd made it through the first day with an overwhelming sense of revulsion. Then that had given way to a studied serenity. Different world, he thought. Even a different planet, planet of the apes. He really did find them apish, the young people at the far end of the pool. The young ones, his private name for them, though in fact they were all much the same age as him. Then, again, what did they know about the real world? He had 3 kids to provide for, and he liked his swimming trunks with a tattoo pattern. My husband, Pippa told Pricing, only went to the pool once, just long enough to formulate a theory that with this generation, you can tell people's incomes from the color of their swimming trunks. According to him, the more garish they were, the more likely their owner was to be in the red. Sanford's a sociologist, you see, she added apologetically. In fact, Pippa had really been hoping she might get to know Kelly's parents a bit better here, as she hardly knew them. But Mary and Kenneth Ibbotson had found it hard making the transition from Liverpool to Chup, or maybe from their respective roles as a shop steward in a machine tool factory and a housewife to the bride's parents at a 250-pound wedding, and were spending most of the time holed up in their air-conditioned tent. It was plain to see, Pricing impressed on me, that Pippa was unhappy with her son's choice of career and his social circle, and with the fact that this wedding was being held in a Tunisian luxury resort. But she had a friendly nature and a sharp mind and put a brave face on her unhappiness. Still, I couldn't help but observe social convention and offer my warmest congratulations on her son getting married. She thanked me with a small, ironic laugh. In fact, he went on, it was me who spoiled the cheerful atmosphere by asking if Mark was her only child or whether she had to go through all this elaborate wedding preparation several times before. No, she replied, Mark was her only child. At least the only surviving one. Her elder daughter Laura had been killed 3 years ago, just off the North Cap of Norway, in the bowels of a Hurtigruten cruise ship, on which she'd been working as a librarian. Incinerated, Pippa continued, along with a couple of 100 Scandinavian crime novels and the complete works of Stendhal, which a faulty fan heater had set alight. The manner in which she described her daughter's death surprised me. It was like she was standing at a bar and regaling people with an anecdote about how she'd come by a particular impressive scar or lost the tip of one of her fingers. But perhaps that's actually what it was like for her, like the loss of a body part or an amputation as the result of a grotesque accident. For someone like me who never had any kids, Pricing said, it's hard to imagine what it means to lose a child. He stopped by a small bench in front of the yellow wall. You, though, he said without looking at me, know only too well what it means. No, actually I didn't. Pricing was mistaken. Just because you've experienced something, it doesn't mean that you know what it means. And I had no intention of learning how to fathom it. Some things are so senseless that there's no point trying to give them meaning. Pricing sat down on the bench with his feet planted parallel to one another in the gravel and his hands on his knees. He was giving me time to open up to him. He'd have a long wait. I didn't feel the slightest urge to unburden myself. Please, I said, pulling up a wrought iron chair for myself, go on with your story. He gave me a concerned look and then continued. Pippa told me she was having trouble imagining which group her daughter would have latched onto. Laura would probably have sat up here the whole day, she said. But in all likelihood, they wouldn't have been able to persuade her to come in the first place. Laura hadn't liked hot countries, or large gatherings, or even small ones for that matter. She really wasn't a very gregarious person. Which made it all the more astonishing to her parents when she suddenly announced she'd signed up as a librarian on a ship and would be plying up and down the Norwegian coast on the Hurtigruten run for a whole year. And Laura, Pippa added, just couldn't understand her brother's choice of career. She couldn't be doing with people who were obsessed with money. All things considered, this struck me as a very intriguing description of a young woman, and I could well picture Laura as her daughter. As I got the impression, said Prising, that Pippa liked talking about her daughter, I probed it a bit further. Well, I told her, young people often find it easier to say what they don't like than what they do. At least, I know that was the case for me when I was a young man. So, did Laura know what she liked? Oh yes, replied Pippa. Cold countries, bad weather, the works of Sebald and difficult men. Saying this, she laughed. Then, at least according to Prising, they sat there in silence for some time. It was Pippa who revived the conversation, muttering some bon mot about the trouble with wedding receptions, which she couldn't now recall in detail, though he was adamant it was a very witty observation. Yes, she went on, it was a tricky business, especially if you weren't religious and had cut yourself off from any possibility of sanctifying your union in the sight of God with all the traditional wedding rites. Prising found himself agreeing with her. Unfortunately, he confessed he'd never got the chance to marry. That is, he'd never felt ready to take the plunge. That was a far more accurate reflection of the true state of affairs. Prising treated Pippa to some wedding stories about friends of his, and she reciprocated it with an entertaining account of her own nuptials. How she and Sandford, in a desperate attempt to avoid any suspicion of bourgeois respectability right from the outset of their marriage, had decided to hold their wedding reception in a community centre on Loughborough Estate, a council house development in Brixton. The venue was a concrete pavilion in the shadow of looming tower blocks, and despite being only 10 years old at the time, it had already started to crumble. Inside, it smelt of piss and old clothes. The place had been painted in bold colors by the town planners in the vain hope that it might one day become the hub of a vibrant multicultural community and host parties on summer evenings where all the people from the surrounding tower blocks would congregate to share Pakistani, Caribbean, Ghanaian, and Irish home cooking. In the event, all it had played host to were occasional gang rapes by bands of local youth and the Salvation Army clothing handouts on the first Tuesday of every month. The inhabitants of the tower blocks, flabbergasted that anyone should want to celebrate a wedding in these surroundings, passed by shaking their heads in disbelief. Small, dark-skinned boys on bikes squashed their noses against the windows to watch the boisterous dancing. A Tibetan chef hired specially for the occasion tried to interest the guests in his tsampa and butter tea, but they were more enthused by the liberal quantities of free beer, and in no time got really plastered, because apart from the tsampa, there was nothing else to eat, and it transpired that solidarity with the Tibetan people didn't go that far. The only upside, said Pippa, was that we soon found ourselves alone with just our friends, because our relatives, parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles all left the reception well before dark, not unreasonably fearing that they might get stabbed and mugged on the way to their cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. And I'm pretty sure there are ample questions. that we have for you, but also just enough material for a good conversation. We have 2 microphones here, which we should use, because otherwise the people who are watching this currently in their dorm rooms, as this event is being live streamed, can't hear what we're saying.
Hi, first of all, thanks for being here. Where do you get the setting of Tunisia? Why there?
Why Tunisia? Well, that's an interesting question, because I would say the book doesn't have necessarily to take place in Tunisia. The important thing is that it's a, let's say, developing country with some tourism, and I want to have this setting where poor people from a country have to serve the rich tourists coming there, tourists who like to be in a very artificial environment. They don't really want to be in Tunisia. It has to be luxurious, and it has only to give a little scent of Tunisia. That's something which interested me, the clash of those 2 group of peoples you have there. And then, on the other hand, so it could take place also in, let's say, Mexico or Thailand or something like this. But I also have wanted it to take place in the oasis, because an oasis is a very closed place in a hostile environment. So it's kind of something a little bit like the mental hospital in the beginning, which you can read also as a very closed place in a difficult environment, which is maybe too much for you, and you go into the psychiatric, into the mental hospital for a kind of a rest. It could be like an oasis. So it's kind of a mirroring image. Also, the perimeter wall around where they walking in this asylum, and also the perimeter wall around the oasis. And it is important that it is a hostile environment, because later in the book, I can say that without too much spoilers, I think. It's the book goes on, and they celebrate this huge wedding, and in the night when they celebrate the wedding, England or Great Britain has to declare bankruptcy. So they wake up with a heavy head, no credit cards anymore, no jobs anymore. They can't pay their bill, so they are thrown out of this resort, and they're kind of stranded in the middle of the desert.
How much of that narrative was supposed to be like funny in a dark way?
Should be what?
Supposed to be funny? Was that narrative supposed to be funny? Because I thought there's some lines that seemed kind of funny.
It should be, yes.
Yeah. But like, so how much that when you actually like, how much of it did you intend to be funny? Like, the references to like the mugging or stabbed, or like the gang rape in the community center. How much of that was supposed to be funny versus like?
It's difficult to say. I mean, sometimes I surprise myself when I write, and I'm kind of writing, and actually after I finished the book, I had a feeling of I have really written a kind of a horrible book too. It's funny, but it's really it's a what is the right ein böses Buch, an evil book, or yeah. So sometimes it happens. It's kind of, for me, writing is always also an act where I can kind of distance myself from the world. So it gets this sometimes a little bit bitter or ironic tone.
Thank you again for coming. That's incredibly beautiful, and what amazing English premiere. So what I was wondering about, definitely with the restriction of the spaces, but it seems the way we're moving throughout time, and I was wondering if that, or moving throughout different perspectives, if that's related at all to Prizzi's mental illness, or if you set it up in that way to kind of go in and out of different experiences and people, and how those relate.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if you have a protagonist, somebody narrating a story, and you know he's in a mental hospital, he is unreliable. That's clear from the beginning on. You can't trust him really, which is an old sujet in literature, especially in German literature. Very famous in Günter Grass' Blechtrommel, where already on the first page the narrator says, "You can't trust me because I'm in a mental hospital." So the whole book has a kind of a, I try to set it up like a Fata Morgana or something like this. It should be always not really clear what is true. Is it just hyperbolic? Is he lying? What really happened? That should be kind of vague. I try to do that. Also in the language, there is a lot of, I'm not sure if it was like this or yes. Which of course has to do also with the state of mind of pricing, that he never can decide and all those things. Mm-hmm.
May I ask us, does that also have to do with the state of crisis too? And the larger crisis about the bankruptcy of the whole state of England?
Yes, I would say. Because we often have the feeling that our time of crisis is that complex that we are not able to grasp it or to get a whole picture. So it's all like shuttered into thousands of little pieces or something like this. And it's like a kaleidoscope and you don't know how it fits together, things like this, yes.
Hi, thanks again. My question has to do with the cultural component of language and how you use it. So you first wrote this book in German, yes?
Yes.
How much of the work do you think was influenced by German's economic status in writing also in German and having this one moment where they're reading the same book, but once in English and once in German? How much of that plays into your plot?
I didn't get the second part of your question.
So the one part where he meets people,
yeah,
and she's reading the book she's reading it in English.
Yes.
And he's reading it in German.
Yes.
What is that moment for you in terms of cultural transition, transformation, sharing, that they're reading the same thing but in this different language?
The thing is that those people, they all speak different languages. You have those people who speak French in here, those who speak German and Swiss German and English. And Pricing is kind of a, he can speak a lot of languages. He's very educated and he likes to brag also about that. But there is still all the time, you have to be afraid that it could be a misunderstanding because you didn't get the other language that good. Everything could also be like something wrong in the translation or in your understanding, which is also a point which makes it kind of vague. But for me, there are quite some sentences in the book which are in English, in the German version. Some are in French too. And that's something I like to do. Those are not that difficult and not that relevant sentences. So if you read it in German, you don't speak English or French, you still would probably get what the sentence is about. But it gives a certain tone of it from something very international and things like this, which I like to do. For me, the nicest thing would be if I would speak all these languages and I could always use the language they are really talking. But I can't do it, and I think I wouldn't find any readers who can read those languages.
Maybe I'll ask a question. So I was wondering, you alluded to, or you compared the mental hospital to an oasis, and it begins with the mental hospital, it ends with the mental hospital, and this is a book about crisis and about the financial crash and a world at the brink of structural collapse in that sense. So how do you see the utopian potential in that mental hospital?
The book is mostly more dystopian, and there's not so much utopian aspects in it, but at the beginning of the book there is a quote by Franz Borkenau. And there he talks about barbarism, and he says that even when the world or our culture plunges into barbarism or barbarian behavior, for the first thing, it's always also a creative moment where new things can develop. And secondly, he says that we shouldn't expect in these moments of when whole societies drop into barbarism that we have a situation of a tabula rasa, that everything is gone. There are still things who can resist. And in my book, you will never learn what really happens to the world after this huge imaginative financial crisis. I actually describe it as a crisis following on the actual crisis we had starting in 2007, 2008. So I only describe what happens in the Oasis resort, but not what happens to the world as a whole. So you always have to ask as a reader in the end, what happens to the world? And the only clue or hint I give is that they still are in this mental hospital. So what I hope with Franz Borkenau is that things like a social system and a certain social democratic inventions like healthcare systems and things like this may have a certain persistence, may survive that, because after the crisis, a poor guy and a really rich guy are treated in the same clinic and their mental illnesses be taken serious. So in this book, the clinic is the mental hospital is kind of the best hope I have, yeah.
I have a question along the lines of barbarianism. You started your book with a quote that, had to do with that and the idea of morality and this clean slate idea, whatever that word was in another language. And my question is, how did you choose this quote to start your book? And if it kind of inspired your book, or if the other way around, you wrote the book and found a quote that corresponded to
Yeah, pretty much
your
the
idea.
second.
Yeah?
Yeah. Mm.
Okay.
So Holden Caulfield also was a narrator who was in a mental hospital. Mm-hmm. And I'm a psychologist, so I think about mental hospitals quite a bit. It strikes me that in mental hospitals, there is something profound that happens with the truth. The rest of the world may not trust the people who are patients.
Yes.
But the patients themselves, the oasis, it is an oasis for the truth, because people will disclose, and patients will disclose in a mental hospital because it is an oasis in a way that they won't in the rest of the world. And it occurs to me that, in the financial crisis, there was no oasis for the truth. So I guess what I'm wondering, I guess what I'm wondering is who is the truth teller in the resort, in the luxury oasis resort, since I would see the patient speaking in the mental hospital. Just because the rest of the world doesn't trust the person doesn't mean that they are not capable of finding the truth. So who is the truth teller in the resort? That's my question.
I think no one. Or actually, I'm not really the guy who believes in one single truth. So I think what I wanted to show in the Oasis, that all those people, when it comes to this collapse, they try to build up their own truth and find a way out of the crisis. So you wouldn't find the real truth. And actually, Jens described that I have this question, or that he says in the beginning of the book, you are asking the wrong questions. And I kind of have to disappoint you because I never tell what the right question would be. But yeah.
Oh, I was you were just talking about how the rich person and the poor guy, they both ended up in the mental hospital. Did you talk about the location of the facility?
Sorry if I...
Of the location of the mental hospital.
Where it takes place, or where it...
No, where physically the hospital
country?
is. Yeah.
Yeah, probably in Switzerland, I thought, yeah.
Has it got anything to do with like the patients being... Has it got anything to do with the like bankruptcy of Britain?
That they are there?
Yeah, I mean, because they cannot pay for the facility, right? And they got told out.
No, that's not the reason, no. Pricing has to encounter some pretty horrible things which are happening after the bankruptcy night in that resort. It gets pretty barbaric there. And he sees a lot of stuff which is hard to deal with. And that might be the reason for him that he has to go to the mental hospital. Actually, in the whole book, he can't decide anything. Not the smallest thing, not the biggest thing. He can't, when he has to face that somebody is producing for him in Tunisia with child labor, he can't stop that. But he can't decide if he should go to dinner with his shirt buttoned up close or open. So I think this state of not being able to make any decisions gets kind of pathologically in the end, and then that's might be the problem for him to be there. But even the doctor there has a problem to really see what it is.
I was interested in the title that precedes, or is the title of the reading, Crisis of Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that verse and then I read the book. And so I want to ask you about, I mean, I understand what the crisis was, but I guess I don't understand what the beauty was, except for your writing and your structuring and the aesthetics of the satire and the novella. But
I actually have to pass over the question to Jens, I think, because he made up the title. Yeah.
I did, in fact.
I love the title, and it was very,
I did, in fact, come up
attractive.
with that title. I guess one of the nice things that Jonas's novel forces us to do, and please disagree with me. It actually forces us to take a look at that which is unpleasant, and which doesn't fit into a narrative. And the novel is set up in a way that it constantly changes perspectives and gives us different looks at one of the same object, if you so will, from different angles. The seedy underbelly of the pristine resort, which Jonas so beautifully described, with the white cushions and the white tents, which at night literally turns into a form of barbarity. It's a thin membrane that simply separates civilization and culture. Civilization and culture, and there is that Freudian slip exactly. Civilization and barbarity within the same culture, and so they do wake up, as Jonas says. And I don't know if I can.
Yeah.
What happens at the night? The oasis catches on fire. More animals die, and it goes on from there. Not only that.
Maybe questioning the title is asking the wrong question.
Perhaps, but it was a good question nonetheless.
I'm back again. 2 questions this time. One of the quotes that really intrigued me was the quote that just because you experience something doesn't mean you understand it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this being applicable to Price's experience in the mental hospital, him experiencing this mental break in some ways, and him not being able to understand it, but at the same time trying to cope through what he doesn't understand?
Yeah. Okay, I hope I get you right. I would say, I mean, that quote probably doesn't really apply to pricing, because he's that kind of guy who probably thinks of himself that he always know what things mean. He is in no doubt that he has everything under control and he knows what things means. So that is just something who applies to the other guy, I would say. So it's not a pricing thing. He's kind of the opposite. He's always sure about himself in a kind of a strange way. Mm.
Second question about the camels.
Yeah.
Why do all the camels die?
Why do all the camels die? I don't hate camels. I can't say that much. I love camels, actually. Well, yeah. There are several reasons. The one was I wanted to have, in the beginning of the book, in the first chapter, this clash of these cultures, the old camel, the old who people had used since hundreds of years, clashing together with this new tourist bus, also clashing together the nomadic lifestyle and the tourism lifestyle and those things. And when I was searching for a scene which I can describe that, I remembered an article I found quite many years ago in a newspaper I have read in Djibouti in East Africa, where I went for a research travel for another book. And this newspaper article showed a picture and had an article about an accident with a truck and camels. And it's quite an amazing picture, a horrible picture. And I brought it with me and I had it in my drawer somewhere for years. And then it came up and I thought, that's it. And I took out this picture and wrote this scene. And I also wanted to have this animal suffering in the beginning, because it's kind of a symbol for the unschuldig, innocent, for the innocent creature. And when something like this happens in the first chapter of a book, you're warned as a reader. You have to be alert. Everything can happen, the baddest thing. That's kind of, yes. And then it's also, of course, the camel is in the whole book something like a leitmotif, which is very typically for a novella, which mostly has a leitmotif.
Sure. So Jonas, so we alluded to a few times earlier this repeating theme of inaction in the book, particularly in the part of the protagonist, Presig. And it comes up time and again. I guess what struck me was the moments when he gets lost in thought, contemplating how he could use his wealth to make a difference in the lives of the Tunisians. So in the case of the camel driver, whose livelihood has been lost, and he thinks I could compensate the man and make his family whole and let him buy a new herd of camels. Or when he visits the factory with the child labor, and he contemplates acting every time. So his inaction, it's not an inability to act, but it's almost a lack of courage or a lack of will to act. And I guess thinking about the broader themes of the book and the fact that it is a book about crisis and financial crisis specifically, I wonder if you were drawing or attempting to draw parallels, I guess, maybe first with certain aspects of the crisis that we've all lived through, and maybe secondly a broader critique of the economic order and of the nature of globalization between rich and poor countries.
Well, how do I answer that? Can you repeat the question? Just the core of the question again?
Oh, sure. I guess I'm inaction on the part of this wealthy Westerner who has the capacity to act but lacks the will to act. And I wonder if you're attempting to draw broader parallels between that and a criticism of the economic order.
Yeah, okay. I mean, what an interesting thing is, I think, is that many of us do the same thing like pricing in a way, because we say economics, that's so complicated, and the whole economic world, it's kind of out of my reach. It's too complicated, and for that reason, I just go back on this position as a spectator. I don't think I can really grasp an end where I can do my share. But maybe that's maybe it's more a European problem too. I mean, sometimes I have the feeling that at least in the US you can say much more easier, I want to try to change the world with my work or something like this. If you say that about your work in Germany, you're just, it's ridiculous. You can't say that. Which, I mean, in Stanford, when I was in Stanford, many people said that about the new app they're designing. I'm going to change the world with it. But in Europe, it's kind of a problem. You can go back to this position and say everything is just so complicated. I'm not really an actor in this. And even politicians help us to act like, or to go on this behavior, like Merkel in the crisis, when she said, we are out of options. The thing I decided we do, it's the only thing we can do. And that's kind of, for a democracy, it's a catastrophe, because it's saying to people, you don't understand it. There's one single solution, we do that, and there's no talking about it. And you don't even have to bother, because I did it, the decision, and we're going this way. So that's one problem. And on the other way, you have those young people who are working in the finance system in the London city. And they, of course, believe very much that they can act, maybe in a kind of a hyperbolic way even. It's kind of the other end of the spectrum. They have the feeling that with what they do, they can change the world. They're the master of the universe, they call themselves, things like this. And both positions are kind of a huge problem in our time, I would say. Maybe it's still the old Aristotelian problem. You find some middle ground.
You mentioned earlier about how the resort where these people stay sort of falls into a barbaric state, and they have to find their own way out of it. Do you think that there's a did you intend to have a parallel there between that and real life, with people having to build their way out of a barbaric state?
No, not that much, I wouldn't say. It's kind of an artificial situation, and of course I hope it corresponds somehow and you can connect it to the real world, but it's in a satiric way, you know. It's I mean, if I would have wanted to do that, I should have wrote the book about the crisis in Greece right now, about the 60% young people who are unemployed there, about the, I don't know, 20,000 drug addicts on the streets of Athens because of the crisis and things like this. It would have been I would have had to write another book.
And one more thing. In part, this is hinted a little bit at the title, and also it was on the posters for this event. I haven't read the whole book yet, but does this story have something to do with the Arab Spring?
Yes,
yeah,
it does.
And what exactly is, how is that connected to the story?
In the same time when the crisis starts in the book, there also starts the second financial crisis, kind of, the following crisis of the actual crisis. There's also starting an imaginary second Arab Spring in the book. And this was something which I didn't have planned from the beginning on, because I was writing on the end of the second chapter when the Arab Spring started in Tunisia. So I was kind of surprised about that. But I picked it up, of course, because it's an interesting topic. And it's maybe that what Borkenau says, that in a state of barbaric, or in a time of barbaric acting, always new things can develop too, and maybe there's something good coming out of that. But yeah, well, it's not that good too in the book.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you this evening. When you began talking, the first thing that leapt to my mind was Thomas Mann, Magic Mountain, because of the hospital circumstances.
Yeah.
And I've thoroughly enjoyed having that as kind of a backdrop to these utterly different sequence of events. But I'm wondering whether that may have played any part in the genesis of this wonderful book.
No, it didn't. It didn't. I am kind of not that a huge fan of the magic. Yeah, no, I wouldn't. Yeah, I have my problems with that book. I do like it, but I do have my problems with it, and it's not something I would refer very strongly to.
I certainly didn't mean to say that it was an homage.
No, it wasn't. I wasn't thinking about that book when writing it. No. Back.
This question might be more for you than for you, because it is, again, about the title. Was it at all referencing in any way the book Barbarians at the Gate?
No.
Oh, okay.
I even haven't read this till
No, because I
now.
thought globally it was kind of at a macrocosm, imitating at the microcosm what was going on in that book.
No, it's still
Oh,
on my
cool.
reading list. I
All right.
should read that one.
I also have nothing to do with the title of his book, by the way. That was his own invention, and a very good one.
A double question. When you write, do you start with a schematic from beginning to end and then fill it in? Or do you plunge in and let the characters evolve from there? Or is it some combination? And the second question I'll ask after that one.
It's always different. In this particular book, it was kind of strange because I wrote the first 5 sentences, and then I wrote the last 5 sentences, and I didn't really knew by that moment what would be between those 2 parts. So I developed it in writing. And I didn't work very schematically. Because, I mean, it's a short book, you know, it's short enough to have the whole thing under control and in my head. I have written a much, much longer book, which I never have published, which I had to work very much with a plan, and I had the whole wall of my workroom looked like some strange, I put all the papers up and draw lines and did things like this, yeah, but not with this one.
Thank you. And the second question is, as you went from relatively unknown to famous, how has fame affected you in your personal life?
I have a feeling it just started today with the fame. So I can tell you tomorrow, maybe.
Okay, we maybe have time for one more question. And if not, then we will end on a note of Jonas's fame. And this tonight is not only the premiere of Jonas reading in English, it's also the premiere, actually, of selling the English edition of Jonas's book in the United States here at Bowdoin. We're the first bookstore that has the book for sale. We currently have 3 copies left of a large stock that we've ordered. So you can get them here. Jonas, I'm sure, is willing to sign. And please thank me for this wonderful evening with Jonas, for the conversation, and join me in a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.